From Nashville, Tennessee, Music City, USA, and the home of hot chicken, it's the Rick Altizer Show. Sit back, buckle up. Rick will talk with the movers, shakers, and creators who put Christ in Christian entertainment. He's a man who's clear so the world can hear. Here's Rick Altizer.
Now that little black sheep, she ain't nothing but trouble. She's not worth much, and she'll cost you double. Shepherd say he knows, but he won't see. He's gonna go out and find that little black sheep. Little black sheep, little black sheep, in the howling wind, with no relief in a cold, cold world. Nothing sounds so sweet as the voice of the shepherd to the little black sheep.
Thank you for joining us today. I'm very pleased to have Ashley Cleveland with us today. Ashley is a singer, songwriter, as well as a author, and we're going to be talking about her book and about her records and about her career. And so welcome, Ashley, to the program.
Hey, Rick. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Ashley, just for those, we'll do a little promo on Ashley Cleveland right here. Kind of the Ashley Cleveland promo time. She's had 2 Dove Awards, 3 Grammy Awards. So, what do you do with your Grammy Awards? Are they displayed prominently?
Well, I mean, I won't lie to you. There was a moment where I thought, I wonder if I could put these in the yard with Klieg lights on them, but that seemed a bit much for my neighbors. No, they're just we have bookshelves in our library, and they're there. So they're certainly not hidden, and but they're also hopefully they're not in people's faces. That seems
I knew somebody who had a Dove Award and they used it for a toilet paper roll holder.
Well, the thing about putting awards in I don't. That wouldn't work for me. I'm a musical trench worker in many ways. My son Henry says, "Mom, you're kind of a pseudo celebrity. You're the Grammy winner and the Dove winner that no one's ever heard of." So for me, those awards translated into career longevity, and they were huge gifts. They were a huge statement to me at a time when I really could have used the encouragement of the jury of my peers, and so there's no way I would denigrate them. It just meant too much to me.
That's awesome. Well, you were the first woman to be nominated for the Gospel Rock Award for the Grammy, and the only woman to have won it 3 times. So that you have that, like you said, the acclaim of your peers. Did that translate into millions and millions of records for you?
Oh, heavens, no. I've had, a lot of critical success in my career and very little commercial success. So, when I say I'm in the trenches, and I'm also kind of in the margins too. I've never been a very neat fit into a musical genre. So I'm not really. I'm a Christian. I belong to Christ. I love to write songs about faith, but I kind of write about all of life from that lens. And I've never been a neat fit in contemporary Christian musical culture at all. I'm in most places. I'm more or less welcome, but not necessarily encouraged. And the same would hold true of the mainstream. I go a lot of places in the mainstream. I began there. But at the end of the day, I think there's probably too much message in the music for So I end up kind of in the middle, and I go everywhere and I belong nowhere. So it's hard to get a lot of traction if that's your path.
Yeah. We're going to get to the book, but I know in the book you had 8 albums out. Is that correct?
Well, actually, I'm just starting my 10th record.
Okay.
So the book's the book's a little bit over 3 years old.
Okay. And I know the first record deal you had was with Atlantic.
Mm-hmm.
And it was interesting that was not a Christian record deal.
Not at all.
And then you communicated to the head of the label, Ahmet
Erdogan, one of the great musical Svengalis of the world of history.
And you communicated that you wanted to start singing more about your faith, and he seemed to be very opposed to that.
Well, there were 2 songs on the record that were clearly, at least I think, maybe not to somebody that wasn't a person of faith, they would not have been clear. But for anybody that was a Christian or a person of faith, they were clearly about faith and clearly coming from some, aspect of biblical faith. So what happened was on talk shows, and honestly, it's been a number of years, so I can't remember the exact circumstances, but there were a couple of people who were Christians who wound up on talk shows for different reasons, and when the topic of music came up, they used me as an example of somebody, a believer who was actually in the mainstream. And from that, the Christian industry got interested. So it wasn't that I was getting a lot of airplay in Christian music, but I was being written up a lot. That was back in the era of magazines. So there were a lot of periodicals, there was a lot of content recommending the record, and I started to have sales in that market. And I went to Ahmet Erdogan and said, the contemporary Christian industry is showing interest in me. Have you thought about having a dual distribution where my records would be in the mainstream, but they would also be in the Christian marketplace? And he was very quick to say, at that time, which was 1992 maybe, he said, that is not what we do. If that's what you want to do, you need to go do it someplace else.
Why do you think he was so hesitant?
I think he just said they had a very clear track, and they had a very clear track record. I mean, Atlantic he built that label into one of the biggest labels of all time. And so I think it was just from a purely business standpoint, it was just a conflict of interest. But it wasn't that long before Atlantic had Atlantic Christian. Mm-hmm. Once the era, shortly after that, frankly, the contemporary Christian format began to be really successful, and so everybody got in on the act. But just at that time, it was really at the forefront, and they were Atlantic Records, and that their brand was very clear to their listeners, and he wasn't interested in changing it at that time. So I don't think it was an attack on Christianity. Okay. I really think he was just being a businessman.
Okay. So did they give you pressure to not say the word Jesus on your records, or they didn't want you dropping J-bombs, or was that?
No, that never came up. Always. And this is what's so interesting to me, Rick. It's, having been on both sides of the issue, I think in mainstream music, you can write about anything you want to write about. And once you're established as a mainstream artist, I think the issue for me was I was a known Christian. And so that changed it. It sounded like I was, I think there was some concern that I was using it to proselytize but it's really only been in Christian music where you were required to have a certain number of references to the Lord Jesus. But in mainstream music, established artists talk about Jesus all the time. Mm-hmm. It's a little bit more, it's broader. It's always been broader.
I'm talking with singer, songwriter, and author Ashley Cleveland. And I want to talk a little bit about your book. It's called A Little Black Sheep, a memoir. Mm. And you handed it to me a few weeks ago when I saw you at the Russ Taff event, and went on vacation to South Carolina. And with my wife, and started, I'm going to have this interview with Ashley. I should probably kind of look through this book a little bit, right? So I started looking through the book, and I start reading it, and I just start going, oh my gosh, this, I couldn't put it down. I could not put your book down. My wife, I'm on vacation. I can't put it down. It was first off, it was amazing. I loved it.
Thank you.
It shouldn't be any surprise. You're a very good writer. The writing was so well done. It was, well, and of course, because that's what you do. You're a songwriter. So the same skill kind of just lends itself to narration and telling a story. And that's what you've done with your songs. And so you're telling your story. What story would you possibly know better? But I just wanted to tell you, I could not put it down. It was like some kind of mystery. Like, oh no. How does the guy get out of? How does he get out of this? It's like, oh no, what happens now? How does she get through this? Each chapter, I wanted to go to the next chapter. As soon as the chapter was over, I wanted to get what happens next. And so I just wanted to tell you, I don't want to be too much of a fanboy here, but I loved it. It was a great book.
Well, I'm all for that. Thank you so much.
And so I noticed you spent some time in Knoxville.
I was born at Fort Sanders Hospital in Knoxville, Tennessee.
I was born in Baptist.
Were you really?
You're a Bearden Bulldog. I went to Farragut.
Yes. I only went to Bearden my last year of high school, and I marginally attended school. Let me just make that clear. But enough to graduate, so everyone had great relief over that.
Yep. I if you cut me, I bleed orange.
Ah. Well, I guess if I was more of a sports fan, I might bleed some orange too, but that just never was my.
Never got into
it. It wasn't my jam. No.
Yeah, no. I sold Cokes at Neyland Stadium when I was 13, so I could get into the games for free.
Oh well, there you go. That's enterprising.
That's me.
Good.
I'd sell for about the first half, then I would get lost and find an open seat and watch the rest of the game. So anyway, when I was reading that about Knoxville, I was going, that's awesome. 'Cause we were kind of kicking around at the same time there.
Really?
It's interesting.
Yeah. It's a great place to be. I mean, my parents split up when I was quite young, and so my mother moved to San Francisco, which I talk about in the book. She might as well have gone to Mars because I was a little girl from the South. And had no frame of reference. And Knoxville, in many ways, even though it was the third largest city, or actually the second largest city in third largest city in the state, it was very much a small town. People, within your sphere, you knew everybody, and everybody kind of kept an eye out on everybody. And California was 15 years ahead progressively, and I had zip in the way of a frame of reference. And so it was alarming to me to move out there. I just felt like a sea change that I didn't know how to navigate. So when I got back to Tennessee, I was very happy.
Well, I'd like to kind of just get into your story a little bit because it's such a fascinating story. In the book, again, it just, oh my gosh. And then each chapter, it's like, oh my gosh. It just goes on and on. It's such a, in a sense, it's a sad story, but it's so triumphant of what God has done in your life. that he took this little black sheep and made her something beautiful. It's just amazing. So I'd like to kind of talk about that.
Sure.
You start out talking about your broken home, and there was a lot of you very vulnerable and transparent about your own sin and brokenness through your life. And I know now you're on this side of it. So can you talk a little bit about some of the pain that were you trying to find a way to numb out pain? Was there there's pain in the childhood, and then were you looking for ways to avoid the pain or disconnect from the pain?
Well, okay, first of all, I never say I'm on the other side of brokenness. I think there's a significant part of me that will stay broken until I cross over to meet the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
And that, and it took me a long, long time to make peace with that. But I have made peace with that because I've, kind of discovered that the best part of me is in that really broken place. Whatever I have to offer others, whatever I have, it's a place that keeps me tied to the Lord. And it's the place of deepest compassion and empathy, which I don't have a lot of. I missed that. I missed that when they were handing those things out. But whatever is there, and a real desire for service, it's all in that really broken place. So I will say that. And then I will also say that, yes, I was a broken-hearted child. No question. But but both my parents were alcoholics. There was, in fact, I would dare say that my family is something of an alcoholic dynasty. So when you're looking at alcoholism and drug addiction, which I ultimately became dually addicted in both arenas, and I was born into the world as the child of two alcoholics, that's an illness. Alcoholism is, I don't know, I know how the big book of alcoholics describes it as an allergy of the body and an obsession of the mind. And I do know that the American Medical Association recognizes it as an illness, and it is that simultaneous physical, mental, and emotional craving that we become powerless to do anything about. So I did not start drinking when I was a small child, but it's interesting. I probably needed a drink when I was a small child because it was crazy. And I think a lot of times the addict behavior exhibits itself up to years before the person actually picks up a drink or takes a drug or starts, medicating with food or whatever kind of physical obsession comes into play. A lot of times you see the behavior. And so for me, you could see that behavior. I acted out a lot. I was kind of the family scapegoat. And yes, I was trying to cope with overwhelming sorrow and had no capacity to do that.
Talk to me about your relationship with your mom and your dad.
Well, my mother was and is a loving person, and she has now been sober for many, many years, over 30 years. And so that's something that we share together. We share recovery and sobriety together, and are both very active and devoted to that. So that's been a real gift. Both of my parents, and then my father, he stopped drinking, but he never really recovered. And my father was gay, and he so much of his life, I think he was a very emotionally deep person, but he was unable to reconcile so much of his life that he just couldn't go there. He really stayed very close to the surface almost all the time. That was the shallow water was always the safest for him. And therefore, his focus was on presentation, was on performance. Both of my parents are incredibly accomplished and gifted. My father was an architect and interior designer, very prominent in Knoxville and beyond. And he had a huge clientele and a real commitment to excellence that crossed over into perfection. And I think, being his child was not easy. And there was a lot of emphasis on how you looked, the quality of how you put clothes together, just sort of the social graces were front and center. And that, honestly, was not my specialty. So and my mother could be very critical too, and sort of, she certainly has progressed in many ways beyond that, and but there was just a huge emphasis on presentation and performance. So it's no surprise that I'm a performer.
Interesting. Was there something about when you would get immediate gratification from an audience that touched a part of you?
Oh, absolutely. But truly, I think, by the time when I discovered music as a teenager, I was, I had reached a point already where I could not find any reason to think that I had anything of value. And then I fell into this recognition that I had a natural gift for playing, singing, and then later writing music that was pretty strong. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, here was this thing I could do that instead of getting negative response, got positive response. And so it was the one thing I could do. It was the one thing I would do. It also, music became a way, it became a channel to articulate that heartbrokenness. Mm-hmm. So I took it as far as I could go. And the other thing I want to say is, I didn't feel comfortable around people. Well, if you want to be alone, the stage is perfect.
Mm-hmm. It's almost like you can look to that for affirmation. It becomes a person, almost, a non-person person, where I can get affirmation. I'm not getting affirmation from my family. I'm not getting affirmation. I'm actually, we'll get into this in part 2 of our interview about, I'm actually pushing people away.
Oh,
and
hugely.
It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. I have no one close to me, and I'm making sure that happens. But the stage, the audience, becomes a person, which gives me affirmation, and it's on my terms that I can control, which is very interesting.
Thank you.
Well, we're already done with part 1 of our interview. I mean, that went so quick. I am just so thrilled to have Ashley Cleveland here. We're going to have part 2 of our interview next week. And if you want to, and I highly recommend all my listeners to go check out this book, Little Black Sheep by Ashley Cleveland. And you can get more information about this book at ashleycleveland.com. You can also find out about her concert appearances, her albums, all kinds of information is there. ashleycleveland.com. And, of course, amazon.com has the book and other things, so you can get all kinds of information there. And, Ashley, thank you so much for being a part of the show today. It's just been amazing. I'm looking forward to part 2. If that's okay with you, we're going to kind of see how far the rabbit hole goes.
Sounds good. I'm in.
All right. So join us next week. Same bat time, same bad channel for the Rick Altizer Show as we continue our interview with Ashley Cleveland. The music you are listening to is from my scripture memory record, and I want to give it to you for free. Just go to my website, rickaltizer.com, and click Contact. Altizer is spelled Altizer. Or how about liking my Facebook page, facebook.com/Rick Altizer Show. I want to thank Paul Winkler, the investor coach, for sponsoring this show, and I want to thank you for listening. So be sure to check us out again next week as we discuss how we communicate the gospel through media to our culture. Let's be clear so the world can hear. I'll talk to you next week. Thanks for listening.